Welcome to the Earth Goodwill project. Thank you for liking, sharing and subscribing. Today's discussion is in relation to the star seeds and rainbow children who are incarnating on Mother Earth at the moment and recent years. The rise and fall of different and wealth of different nations across the planet that are playing out at the moment and over the next 50 to 500 years, and key players in their rise and fall, and the actions or the light and dark actions of different spiritual teachers and spiritual frauds and false spiritual prophets in the year of 2020. With the star seeds and rainbow children that are incarnating in recent years and over the coming years, what we're noticing is that they're deliberately choosing to incarnate into troubled families because they're gaining a better insight into the issues that have been plaguing Earth and culture and society for recent decades and for the next decade to come. And many of the rainbow children that are incarnating in recent years, a lot of the star seeds and rainbow children are incarnating into Australia and New Zealand over the last 15 years. Of the children that were not born into these countries, many of them are immigrating to Australia as refugees through their parents who are foreign students, sponsored visa programs. The reason they're choosing Australia is Australia was the spiritual capital of the world. The heart chakra of the world is Uluru, which is in Central Australia. Because of recent events in the last 15 years, the spiritual energies have moved from a centralized model of most of the light workers residing within Victoria and Australia, and then it's now become decentralized, and they're shifting right across Australia and New Zealand, and after the virus lockdowns lift, they'll move across different countries across the world. So these pillars of light, these regular spiritual practitioners and these star seeds and rainbow children, they all have a pillar of light back to the Godhead, to source, and that is what has been protecting Australia and keeping, or from a spiritual perspective, keeping the economic prosperity of Australia running for many decades, for over 25 years. This has all come to an end in 2020 for a myriad of factors. Most of it's got to do with abuse of power, with police forces and political bodies, and also a corruption of different spiritual bodies and false spiritual prophets being put into given positions of power and influence and platforms that they were not karmically entitled to. Over the next decade, many of these spiritual practitioners will leave Victoria and Australia and move to New Zealand and other countries around the world. Looking at the nation of China, they have been involved in questionable activities for a number of years, mostly in the areas of human rights abuses and environmental destruction and large-scale theft of intellectual property. So the karmic flow-on effect and also the genetic engineering of crossing humans and animals, so the consequences of these abuses of power by the Chinese government is a loss of spiritual power for the next 500 years. So their place in the world has been, as a spiritual powerhouse for the next 500 years, is in the process of being relinquished to 3 other nations. And as I mentioned earlier, is due to the environmental destruction in their country, on their land, their human rights abuses of their own people, their abuse of the security surveillance apparatus, the large-scale theft of intellectual property, income from many people and companies across the world, and academic institutions and government bodies. If you look at the spiritual lineage of the current Chinese leader, in the past life, he was one of the key architects of the downfall of Atlantis, the land that fell into the ocean as a consequence of abuses of power, abuses of mystical powers and spiritual powers and mental powers. So this caused the land of Atlantis to fall under the sea, and most of that civilization and all of its knowledge was lost during that time. One of the other key architects, or the key players in the downfall of Atlantis, is a false spiritual prophet that it resides in Victoria, in Australia, and he too has been instrumental in events that have occurred in late 2019 and 2020 that have caused great social, political, economic and health harm to billions of people around the world. This person has repeatedly been warned over many decades to stop abusing his powers and stop misusing energy, and on working in the dark arts. It's repeatedly disregarded all the advice to stop misusing elements and misusing energies, and has wrongly misrepresented himself as a key spiritual player and being given a platform and power that he was never karmically entitled to, and the consequences of those actions are what is playing out on the world stage in 2020. For this person and his wife's efforts, it has been shown that he has been given by the spiritual hierarchy 10,000 years in the karmic sin bin. For his wife, who's responsible for most of the dark arts, she has been given 1,000 years karmic retribution for her actions in recent years. So effectively what this means is this man has been taken off the earth plane for 10,000 years. However, in the last 2 weeks, that figure has changed to 25,000 years. And in the last couple of weeks, the time that his wife has been put in the karmic sin bin has been upgraded to 8,000 years. In relation to the nation of China, a young boy from a minority group in China who's been reborn into that nation over the last 4 years was karmically destined to be the next Chinese president, and his role in this life, his mission in this life, was to unite China with the West, bring great economic prosperity and peace to the world. Unfortunately, his life mission has been short-circuited. He has been put in over the last 4 years with his mother into a re-education camp in China. Actions that he has endured has caused him some brain damage and considerable damage to his physical body and his internal organs. And his mother is suffering from severe PTSD and severe malnutrition, and is in a semi-comatose state. She's unable to communicate, she's unable to care for him in any effective manner. What I've been shown and have repeatedly over the last month been requested to release publicly is that this young boy, who was destined to be the next Chinese leader and reunite China with the West and bring enormous economic prosperity to China, he has decided to pass over, and he will reincarnate in the next 15 years into another nation, and he's decided to reincarnate into the body of a young American boy, and he will grow up in the Midwest of America. And from what I've been shown, he'll lead a very normal life, have a very normal upbringing, very normal parents. Everything about his life will be very unremarkable until he goes to college when he turns 18, 19. And then he'll develop strong leadership skills and become a great leader and bring enormous economic success to America again in the next 50 years. Additionally, he will achieve his full potential as an American citizen in his next life within the next 50 years. I've also been shown in recent years that many of these spiritual masters are reincarnating here on Earth, and some of them are even ascended masters. We're moving from the darkest point in the history of civilization over the last 1,000 years in 2012. So over the next 50 to 100 years, we're heading back into the Age of Aquarius, and that is the golden age here on Earth. A lot of the spiritual masters are incarnating into Australian families and Kiwi, New Zealand families. Many of these children are consciously deciding to be born disabled so they can suffer the hardships earlier on in the first 3 years of their life. So typically these children might be born with holes in their hearts or have organ damage or some type of obvious disability, which presents them as the most unlikely candidates to be spiritual leaders in the future. Furthermore, a lot of these children are consciously deciding to be born into families that are not spiritually inclined, so their parents do not meditate, their parents do not have any understanding of yoga, their parents may eat meat, they're not vegetarian or vegan, and they are not practicing any energetic or spiritual practices. The reason being for this is karmic, is to bring light into those ancestral lines that where it didn't exist previously, because of abuses of power with false spiritual prophets and different governments who have interfered in ancestral lines in recent decades. And also what I've been shown is these children, they will prosper, they will succeed, they will overcome their disabilities in time, over the first few years of their life, and they have deliberately chosen to suffer great hardships in the first few years of their life so they can wipe out all their karmic debts from their previous lives here on earth, and when they go to school, lead normal lives and grow up and achieve their life missions here on earth. Also, what I'm seeing is, due to the many abuses of power that have taken place across the world in many different countries, with corruption with police forces, police brutality, police informers, racism, positioning of false spiritual prophets and spiritual frauds into positions of power and influence that have been given platforms that they were not karmically entitled to. There has been a reshuffle of life missions, and people that have been prevented from achieving their spiritual missions in this life will be transitioning over into the light much quicker in 2020 and over the next 5 to 10 years. And one of these spiritual leaders who has been curtailed in this life will become one of the key spiritual leaders in the next 50 years in the country of Kazakhstan. And this country was chosen due to its land, its proximity to China and Russia and India. And it was also chosen because this person has a connection to wildlife, particularly horses, wild horses, and land. So every step this person will take will reinvigorate the land of Kazakhstan when he comes of age, and he'll bring enormous spiritual and economic prosperity to that country in the next 50 years. And he, from what I'm shown, is he'll be born into a normal family and lead a very simple life, and most likely go on to work in either agriculture or pastoral care of land or some type of engineering related to agriculture. Person becomes of age, he'll become a leader on the world stage, and he too will also unite the East and the West and the whole world and bring peace, harmony and prosperity to the world in conjunction with his other spiritual colleagues. And this will happen in the next 50 to 100 years. Originally, 2020 to 2025 was meant to be a time of enormous economic prosperity and harmony and peace across the world. However, that changed in 2006, mid-2006, where the wrong dark initiatives will come in, and then again in 2012, where the spiritual light of the world was extinguished for a short period of time due to dark forces being placed in positions that they were not entitled to be placed in. And again, events took place in 2014 and 2016, 2018 and 2019 that caused a reshuffling of all of the life missions and spiritual paths of different key spiritual teachers across the world. So these flow-on effects resulted in the original economic prosperity, peace and prosperity and harmony that was destined for Mother Earth to take place in 2020 to 2025. It is no longer going to happen. And the great technological and scientific advancements that were meant to take place from 2025 to 2050 and 2050 to 2100 has been delayed significantly, and this is due to the wrong people being placed in positions of influence and power. It's also in addition to the untimely deaths and, I guess, police harassment, police bashings and torture of key spiritual leaders in different sectors of the world, particularly within Australia, in Malaysia, China, Russia, some parts of America over the last 15 years, and I've also been told Great Britain as well, and Papua New Guinea. So there will be other nations that have had spiritual leaders that have had their light extinguished prematurely, but these are the countries that I am familiar with at this time. So as a consequence of these events that have occurred over the last 15 years, it has displaced all of the true key spiritual leaders and replaced them with false spiritual prophets. Then what we have in place now in 2020 is a great reckoning, and it's a falling out, sorting the wheat from the chaff, from the true leaders in the world and the pretenders. So in relation to America and President Donald Trump, he is actually being placed as a leader of America for this period of time for a spiritual reason. He acts as a mirror to the American people to show them their strengths and their weaknesses and what they have to overcome. This is his role. This was his destiny. There was no one else that could do this job, and he is reflecting back to the American people what they don't want to see about themselves and how they treat other people in their nation and around the world. So his position in 2020 is karmic, or from the last 2016 to 2020 is karmic, and this was the role he was meant to play in this life, and he has been very successful in playing this role. With countries like Russia, so moving forward, when they, over the next 30 years, they will become a global superpower. Once this current Russian government administration falls, then the youth will rise up, and when they learn to integrate their scientific and technological nous with creativity and connect that with their spiritual powers, then they will become a very successful nation in the world. And they too will also bring great peace and harmony into the world in the next 30 to 100 years, after they've overcome the issues at play in Russia as a state at the moment. And going back to America, the nation of America, their current issues with the divisiveness and the duality at play in their nation at the moment is a result of hundreds of years worth of karma and suppressed emotions and abuses of power that are now rising to the surface. So this was always meant to happen. Now is the right time for these suppressed emotions and abuses of power to surface and to be healed and to be integrated back into the heart center. So these issues are quite long-standing, and they're very deeply rooted through ancestral lines, so they will take at least 15 years to heal. This doesn't mean that the civil warfare and the riots will continue for 15 years. But what it means is that the ancestral wounds and the emotional and mental wounds and the physical wounds of the American people will take up to 15 years to be healed and integrated back into the heart center. So this is a process, and a process that takes time and dedication and healing, a lot of healing work for every American person. So in relation to New Zealand, a lot of people ask about the nation of New Zealand and its fantastic leadership in the world today. This is no accident, it is by design. Sometime over the next 100 years, the nations of Australia and New Zealand, there will be a lot of tectonic plate shifting and earth changes, and there will be a landmass that rises between New Zealand and Australia, and that will build a bridge between the two countries. And after a few years after this landmass rises, people will be able to walk across from one country to another, from Australia to New Zealand and back and forth. And a lot of new plant life and marine life, lower depths of the earth, will come up, and they'll also walk on the landmass as well. So they'll be able to swim and walk on this landmass, and it'll be something quite amazing. There will also be a lot of earth changes across China mostly in the next 5 years, particularly possibly in late 2020, depending on the actions of the current Chinese government, depending on how they respond to what's going on in the world at the moment. But over the next 5 to 10 years, there'll be massive earth shifts across the nation of China. And again, same with Australia and New Zealand, but this will be more of a slower process over the next 100 years. And not going to go into detail into which cities and parts of these countries will be affected, because I don't want to adversely affect insurance prices and a mass migration of different people from different nations. But what I will say is there are a lot of light workers. There's around 7% of the Australian population are light workers. Perhaps a little bit more, 7.5% of the Australian population are light workers. So that's hundreds of thousands of light workers positioned across Australia, and they meditate on a regular basis and do energy healing work on the land, many of them. And this, for the most part, has protected Australia from a geographic perspective and also economically, and protected it from wars and the like. So if I was a Chinese citizen, I would encourage them to take up regular meditation practices and investigate different energy healing modalities to start healing their land around them and themselves and their ancestry, their families going back 600 years. And if they do this on a regular basis, then they will find that when the earth changes do come about, they'll be pre-warned and they'll know when to flee in advance. They'll know when to pack their bags, because they will be given warnings by the spiritual hierarchy about when they're in danger and when they have to leave their towns. And the catastrophic effects of the earth changes will be lessened the more that the Chinese people take up spiritual practices, meditation and energy healing of themselves and their land. So looking at spiritual teachers and the fallout of spiritual frauds and false prophets around the world in 2020. So 2020 is a year where one has clarity of a vision, and it's a year that will have, from what I'm shown, 2020 is broken down from a period of late 2019, November, December 2019 to November, December 2020 is broken down to 4 separate periods of time, four quarters, so to speak, and these quarters correspond to 4 different seasons and 4 elements, those being fire, air, water and earth. In that, I believe it's in that respective order. And what we're seeing, how we're seeing these 4 elements play out on the world stage from a social economic point of view and environmental point of view, is the fires came through and brought about cleansing in 2019, November, December, January 2020 from the east, from Australia, and the winds of change swept the purified smoky air around the world. Also, we had the Brazilian fires, the fires in the Amazon rainforest, which is the lungs of Mother Earth, that adversely affected Mother Earth and all of its inhabitants and all of the tribal people that live in the Amazon forest and the plant life there and the wildlife and bird life in the Amazon forest. This was not an event that was karmically destined. This was a man-made event, and from what I've been told and from what other spiritual teachers are picking up exactly the same thing or a similar thing, is that there's going to be severe karmic repercussions for the perpetrators of who lit these fires, and that karmic retribution has come in the form of airborne disease coming in the next quarter, being the coronavirus, and wiping out many people in Brazil and around the world. Similarly, the fires in Australia, although they are seasonal and they happen every year, the fires were inflamed by unnatural means, by dark arts of a group of 3 people who were playing with fire elementals, and they didn't know how to control the powers that they invoked, and the fire element ran away with itself and created unnaturally wild fires that were out of control, killing over 1 billion wildlife and dozens of people, and indirectly affecting hundreds more people, causing their deaths. to various respiratory problems and strokes and heart attacks and asthma and the like. So that's the karmic repercussions of misusing fire, comes in the form of airborne disease, and there will be further airborne diseases that will come in the future as well, in future cycles. What I'm seeing after the airborne diseases in 2012 is lots of unnatural weather patterns revolving around water, floods, rains, torrential rains, possibly tsunamis, but more likely floods and heavy rainfalls in different parts of the world. So there will be a global exposure of spiritual frauds and false prophets in 2020. So the great pretenders will be exposed, and a lot of political leaders that can't hack the pace or have chosen to take another route in life will be stepping down from public life or from their roles in positions of power and influence, because they can't handle the pace of change and they can't handle the energies that are influencing the earth during this interesting times. And many new spiritual leaders will rise, and many new artistic leaders will rise during 2020. So there'll be a shifting of the chess pieces across the earth. Also, what I've been shown is already in 2020 there are two world leaders. One is from the east and one is from the west, and neither I will publicly name, but they have both opted, their higher souls have both opted to step out of their physical bodies and walk-ins, so have replaced their soul. So basically what a walk-in is, a soul from the same soul group as the person whose soul it previously inhabited, and that soul, there's been a soul exchange and a soul contract exchange, and that soul has agreed to continue in the body of that person, but on a new life path with a new life mission. And in return, the other person who couldn't handle the pace or was tired or ill or just didn't want to continue, that person has stepped out of that physical body, and then the soul, the new soul that is embodied within that physical, existing physical body, is going to take it on a new path in life. Whereas if these two world leaders take drastically different actions and life paths, and perhaps even step off the world stage during 2020 because they have new soul missions and they're being managed and operated by completely different souls. And the only people that will really recognise the differences are their loved ones or their family members that see them on a daily basis, but they will have no proof, and they generally, in circumstances like this, don't tend to say too much. They just feel like they're living with an imposter. So to conclude, the most important things to be mindful of in 2020 is to go within, is to do your work, meaning to do your regular daily meditation practice, to exercise on a regular basis, at least daily, even if it's just walking, to eat clean, healthy food, preferably eliminating meat and dairy from the body, and to practice kindness, because this is a year of instant karma, and whatever you give out to people will return to you, sometimes tenfold, sometimes 10,000-fold. And a year to make very conscious and deliberate choices, because the choices that one makes this year and the people that they decide to move forward with in business and with politics and with life choices, relationships and so on, will have profound implications for the rest of their life and their future incarnations here on earth. So thank you for listening, liking and subscribing and sharing our content. Namaste.